All right, let's get back to the conversation here. This is going to be one of the hottest topics, so not need to pay attention, bring some of the people back inside. But we've been talking this morning, discussing about the different waves where regulations today is really key for the development of entire industries. And if you've been in San Francisco in the last few months, and probably many of the other cities around the world, you've seen that the last mile of transportation is probably the hottest thing that is happening, in good and bad. So here we have the title of the next panel that is pretty scary. So they say the future of mobility in the hands of the regulators, the Lime story. We have the pleasure to have Eliot Brown from the Wall Street Journal to manage and interview two colleagues from Lime. So take it over, Eliot. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for showing up. Excited to talk about scooters and bikes and whatnot. I cover startups and venture capital here at the Wall Street Journal out in San Francisco, and have largely become a scooter reporter lately. As people who aren't here probably don't realize that these things really, came quickly onto the streets of San Francisco and then became the subject of basically every conversation that anyone would have on the streets. And then they went away, and now they're coming back. I thought maybe we could start by you folks just introducing yourselves, and then just maybe tell everyone about the basic business model of what Lime is and sort of what you do with scooters and bikes.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Colford. Our colleague Andrew Savage was unable to join, so you get two for the price of one today. I am on the government relations team at Lime, primarily focusing on community affairs throughout California. I started when we were just a small startup of 30 people, and I started in operations. I was the Bay Area general manager, so I've seen many sides of the business, have seen it grow from 10 markets to 100, and from bikes to electric bikes to scooters and whatever's next. I'll let my colleague Noah introduce himself, and then we can talk a little bit high level about Lime.
Hello everyone, I'm Noah from Paris, and as you have all heard, Lime has arrived in Europe. I've joined the company now 4 months ago, and let me begin by telling you how much of a beautiful journey it is. We are talking about urban sustainability, smart mobility, environment, climate change, traffic congestion, how people move today versus how they used to do a few years prior. They are of our model. I will give back the questions now to Megan.
Yeah, just high level, I think you asked about Lime in general. Our goal is to provide mobility for all, so we've adapted and had new products come up. We're trying to get in all the markets where we can really make a difference. To Noah's point, we really have many, many goals in mind, but we know that transportation is a really key part of equity, of growth, of the future of cities. And both of us work very closely with regulators on that to try to use our products to put that into action.
And roughly how many cities today do you have scooters and bikes in?
I think the official number is more than 70.
Okay.
But that changes weekly.
Got it. And that's up from probably a fraction of that a year and a half ago?
Yeah, our first market was launched in June of 2017, and that was Greensboro, North Carolina. And then we launched, Seattle was our first major market, which was August of 2017, and then it's just been explosive growth since then.
And just the sort of basic, and maybe take people through the basic business model of how you rent a vehicle, scooter or bike.
Sure, yeah, if you're not familiar, we are a dockless mobility company, so all of our payment, locating scooters, bikes, electric bikes is done on your smartphone. You simply pull it up and find the nearest vehicle, unlock it using a QR code, write it to wherever you want to go, and then you park responsibly, and there's a lot of, we can get into that a little bit later perhaps, but it's all done through the app.
Yeah, so it seems, a big part of what these companies are sort of running into is regulatory issues. So maybe I'll describe what I've observed with the approach for how you guys have launched, and you can agree or disagree or elaborate. So Certainly within the U.S., I'm not as familiar with Europe. It seems the approach is to generally go into a market, try to talk to a few elected officials before, but generally go in very quickly, often get Department of Transportation officials irked with the problem, with the arrival of the scooters. They often, typically, in a lot of cities, they ask you to leave. You usually seem to leave, take the scooters off, and then they put in place a regulation. Is that generally right? And why do you do that as opposed to go in and sort of through the front door and say, we would like to put scooters here. How can we do that?
I can speak to the US, and then maybe you can share about Europe. So we certainly, our hope and our goal is to work with regulators, and we have experience operating, and we have an idea about what makes sense for regulations for dockless mobility. The way we've done that has changed a little bit from bikes. People are pretty familiar with bikes, and now scooters, there's not really a lot of regulation out there. So what our team actually does is everywhere that we launch, we actually do have initial conversations, although it may not be the permit process that happens before we launch. We'll talk to council members, or we'll work with Department of Transportation, and we launch in places where there might not be regulations in the hope that we can gain information about the city, about how people use our scooters that will inform the regulations. So that's sort of the strategy there, is making sure that we're having an open line of communication at every step. Our goal is certainly not to irk the Department of Transportation, although unfortunately sometimes that happens.
Though why not? I mean, because there are a lot of comparisons to the Uber and Lyft approach of just going in. Why not wait for the regulations to come down? Because it's not a giant list, but you folks and certainly your competitor Bird have racked up a number of cease and desists and impounding of scooters.
That part of it is that there's the competitive environment. I think one example that's good is I'll share about what happened in San Francisco. The way that we played that rollout is we wanted to launch in San Francisco. There were no regulations in place, and so we worked with two underserved areas, Districts 10 and Districts 11, which are kind of in the southern part of San Francisco. We worked with those supervisors. We launched for a pop-up one weekend for 3 days where we put scooters on the ground and pulled them off. The hope was that we could see where people ride, we could see how the community engages, we could see what we would need to do for a full rollout. We did that again the next weekend in conjunction with the local community event, and by then our competitors saw that we were doing pop-ups and launched full force, and so it was a competitive need to stay in the market. So that's what we try to do.
What is the experience in Europe, and how many markets are you in now?
Well, what a great source of knowledge for city officials to have companies already, running their free-floating model there and coming back, with a return of experience, actually, and with some cities and even with some countries at ministry level in Europe. We are working on the draft for regulations with them because we are telling them, hey, maybe 30 kilometers, it's too fast. Maybe we should do it 20 because if we increase the speed, more people will fall, etc., etc. What better, actually, than the proof of concept to see how it works and how we can together shape the law? It reminds me a little bit, and this is what I've been telling you earlier. People, the arrival of the bikes at the end of the 19th century in Europe, it was a total mess. And regulators worked with manufacturers to educate people, to tell them, hey, this works, this doesn't, maybe we should adapt this way, like this, like that. Do not let fear-driven decisions take back or slow progress. And this is what, obviously, constituents looks for. When you have your populations and people and your citizens saying, hey, scooters are great and I want to buy some for my children or myself, I want to go to work like that because it saves me time, I'm avoiding traffic congestion. And you're telling them as a regulator, no, we can't because the democratic machine will take 2 years until we can have a law. Wouldn't that expect from you to take the lead? So yes, I wouldn't call that a regulation issue. I would say that it's together that actually we create a better future for the people and for our model. Innovation is challenging the democratic machine. And some courageous mayors across Europe, including the European Commission, which I'm speaking with, are taking the lead. Thank you.
So yeah, it seems on the regulatory front, one of the main concerns is clutter. Maybe could you talk about what you've learned from the early cities and sort of what ideas you've come up to on how to address that?
Clutter is perhaps my least favorite word right now. I think Noah brought up a really good point that every time, when you think about when vehicles were first introduced and people were parking them on the street, it was a knee-jerk reaction. What are these giant 2-ton metal machines doing on the street overnight? And I think it's a similar adjustment that people aren't used to seeing bright green bikes or bright green and white scooters anywhere on the street. But I personally would rather have them there than the vehicles, although that's, we're in a car-centric world. So that's sort of the message that we try to convey, is that you have to adjust. We're trying to combat carbon emissions and inactivity and traffic and congestion. And in order to do that, you have to adjust a little bit.
Do you think that that's what's sort of the time frame for that adjustment, do you think? I mean, are we talking, it'd take 10 years for people to get used to this, or is this just after a month they get a little more, yeah?
What are we saying? Like for Europe? Regulatory-wise, right?
Yeah.
Well, Europe, like European Union, 28 countries, different regulations per country. I think like within less than 2 years from now, and even in a shorter term, we will be able to have a regulation for all of the countries, with having this patchwork of memorandum of understanding that we are doing with each cities to bring it up there, and to have a uniform law that will allow people to move around quicker, reducing their carbon emission, having a real impact on climate change.
Maybe
1 year and a half.
Well, so is that? I mean, yeah, I'm pretty ignorant personally here on the laws of EU and sovereignty, but you can actually preempt local laws like that if you go on the EU level.
It's not preemptive. I mean, 28 countries within the European Union space where they all agree, so that goes through a vote. It's not like, hey, you are doing like this and period. No, that goes through a real process, a vote, exchanges, debate, until we can have a uniform law from everybody that everybody's agreed on.
You see, here it makes much more sense to have every city where one allows them on the sidewalks but not the streets, and the one next door allows them on the streets but not the sidewalk. Because, local sovereignty. Yeah, I mean, in general, could you talk some about the aims in terms of how big of a scope you're looking at? Because I think a lot of people see that each city, will have 200 or 300, but I get the sense you guys are thinking a fair amount bigger than that in terms of longer term.
Yeah, if you really want to move the needle on congestion, climate change, any of that, it's going to take a lot of bikes and scooters. We're going to have to hit a certain level of saturation. As a company, what Lime is trying to do is create a multimodal fleet. So we've got bikes, electric scooters, more potential things down the road. We want to be in all of the markets so that you can travel from Paris to San Francisco and use the same app in both locations. And we want to have enough in each of those cities so that you never have to walk more than a block or so to find a vehicle. And the challenge there is, manyfold, right? You have all parts of the business, all parts of regulation involved in that, but that's the ultimate goal, so the scope is actually quite large.
Do you think that, if you're thinking thousands, tens of thousands of scooters and bikes in a large city, when do you think the infrastructure could sort of be ready for that, be it scooter parking, bike parking? I mean, even the best bike path cities, I think, probably can't just suddenly absorb 10,000 new bikes.
I actually think this is where regulation comes into play, really in a key way. Many cities are afraid exactly of that issue, and so they'll put really restrictive caps on how many scooters or bikes can operate there, which is really detrimental because that means there's not enough saturation and people aren't going to adopt it as a real reliable method of transportation. What we've seen work really well in regulation is to have a minimum, and then if Lime scooters are seeing a certain level of use, then we can increase that number. So it's gradual and it's all use-based. Cities are comfortable because they can see that we're only adding scooters if they're actually being ridden, and we're comfortable knowing that as our scooters are ridden, we can continue to increase our fleet and meet the demand.
Though still, even with that, a city would have to be presumably building out more bike lanes and whatnot, right? I mean, is Lime doing anything on that front, on the infrastructure front, or is your feeling that that's on the cities?
No, definitely. We want to partner with the cities. You know, if there's great infrastructure, more people are going to ride our products, which is great for us, and it's, you know, it's a partnership there. We do a variety of things. One, we share trip data on where people are riding so that cities can make informed decisions about where infrastructure is most needed. We also work with local community organizations. Here in the Bay Area, that's people like the local bike coalitions or bike advocacy groups or walking advocacy groups to support them financially and otherwise in the projects that they're doing to increase bike infrastructure. You know, it's really a holistic approach. We're one part of it, and so we support people that are doing other aspects of that. I don't know if it's different in Europe or the same.
Works the same way. Data, that's key to know where people are going from A to B in cities. How long does it take them? Why are they taking these streets and not the other one? And therefore, how could you adapt the urban transformation of your cities? Data are keys, and this is where the private sectors actually provides an insight to cities in order to be able to take better decisions, and actually decisions that matches what the people needs. That's how we do in Europe.
Have you, on the other side of the data coin, have you heard concerns about, or you know, how do you address concerns about rider information being shared to the city and then that becomes public?
Yeah, so I should clarify, we don't actually share rider information, and actually we don't collect any information of riders like demographics. We do surveys that are voluntary, but all the data that we share with cities is purely route data about, you know, high traffic areas, low traffic areas, highest pickup, highest drop off, completely anonymized.
So you folks started, you know, way back in January 17 as a bike company. And now I think the bulk of what you deploy is scooters. Can you talk about that transformation? How did that come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were originally Lime Bike, now we are Lime. I think the vision has always been the same. The vision has always been mobility. Initially, our founders saw a really great opportunity with bikes, with dockless bikes in particular, and thought that that was going to be the great way to achieve mobility. I think that the fact that we have scooters now is a testament to the agility and nimbleness of our approach, of our company, of our team members, of our hardware. I think that we're so young still that we're still learning and we're open to learning, which is, I think, what makes us really able to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Do you have any theories as to why bikes didn't take off as you know, sort of economically? Because I think depending on the city, it was just well below the threshold. Certainly, that investors were expecting, you know, 2 or 3 rides per bike per day, and yeah, whereas scooters, you know, people seem to be like exceeding expectations.
Yeah, so we actually do, when we were just focused on bikes, we did have, and we still do have, quite a few markets that have made a profit and have been quite successful, particularly with the introduction of electric bikes. So we're not abandoning bikes. I think we have realized that a multimodal approach is much more effective. When we first, in many markets, when we had originally had pedal bikes and introduced either electric bikes or electric scooters, we actually saw a boost across ridership across all products because there are many more options available. So having that sort of data, I think that bikes have been successful, but the more that we can provide other options, we can make them even more successful.
And do you, I'm sure you get this question a fair amount from cities. How do you, you know, deal with the question of what happened with in China with bike share, where on the one hand, suddenly if anyone Googles China bike share, you can sort of
Don't do it.
see the images of what happened. On the one hand, cities became really ubiquitous with these bikes, and you can get anywhere. But on the other, the sidewalks became totally clogged with them, and there's something like 30 million, and then also none of the companies made any money. What lessons have you gleaned from that experience?
I'd be curious how you answer that question in Europe, but I can certainly share that in China, my understanding is that the companies, there was very little regulatory involvement, there was very little political involvement. It was completely driven by the companies without any accountability. So from the get-go, our model has always been, always work hand in hand with regulators. We know that that's really key to our success. I don't know if you have anything to add there on the China question.
No. I think, it's like with everything. If you want something to last, as a responsible free floaters on our side, if you want it to last, you have to make it right. And you can just come in the city and invade and do as it pleases you and make it a real mess, killing the free floating model in the process, which is not what we want to do. So we are not trying to multiply and just have scooters everywhere.
Okay, I think final question. In Europe, so you said you're in 20 markets or so. What's your prediction for the end of the year?
What's my what?
Prediction for the end of the year. How many?
As much as we can.
Okay, thank you,
Oh,
Ben.
no, wait. Just to finish. I'm saying as much as we can because when we arrived in Paris in June and I went to see Madame Hidalgo's cabinet, it was a bet to see how Europeans will react and how other cities and countries. And since then, almost 4 months later, we are getting inbound emails from cities. We are like, hey, we don't have regulations, but we like it, and I think you could make a difference and see how we can speak. And that has been growing increasingly. So I would say, as much as we can, if we can answer to everybody.
Okay, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.